Well, hello again. Now, it's just a really quick introduction here because I know I've called that the hot seat behind us there before. It really was this morning. Eddie Howe speaking for the first time about Sandro Tonali. An awful lot to unpick. I'll be back in just a moment. It's too stormy out there for me to bring you a video from the streets of Gosforth, so I'll bring you into my home. Okay, see you in a second.
Well, guys, as promised, welcome to my kitchen. Yeah, I spent a lot of time sat here. In fact, I was sat here when I got the call to say Steve Bruce was storming across a training pitch to confront Matt Ritchie. Yeah, good times. What isn't good is the weather outside, and it's the reason I'm inside now. So, yeah, I do fear as well. I've brought the weather back with me from Calais. I was there on a job this week. I'll tell you more about that in a second. I left the stadium in Calais about 11 o'clock at night, walked out into a storm. Couldn't get an Uber anywhere. The nearest Uber, I think, was in Dover, and the local taxi company certainly didn't care much for my GCSE level French. So, yeah, I walked about a mile in driving rain before a taxi, or what I think was a taxi, took pity on me. The guy certainly took 30 euros off me anyway and took me to where I wanted to be, which was the only late bar open in Calais, except when I got there, because of the storm, it was shut. Yeah, grim times. But it did give me a chance to work on the feature I was there for, and that was a Finding Eden Hazard piece. I've spent time in Madrid and France the last couple of weeks. I eventually did track him down. That will be on Mail Online this afternoon. I'll put the links to the video and the written feature as well. A little bit of fun I've had with that. So please do click and read non-Newcastle United content too. But we're here to talk about Newcastle, and yeah, now Eden Hazard won't be playing football for the foreseeable future. He's retired, and another player, Sandro Tonali, who after this weekend, what we expect is that Tonali is facing a ban of at least a year for illegal betting on his own team. We'll let me believe he has. He has admitted to that during a meeting with Italian prosecutors last week in Turin. Now, I'm going to take you inside Eddie Howe's press conference today, tell you what was said, and then after that, I'm going to give you my thoughts on the subject. Now, if any lawyers are watching, I mean, guys, before we go any further, any lawyers, please hit like and subscribe. The more the merrier. But before you do draft any legal letters, I'm just exploring all manner of avenues in which this story, this case will go down. I do think there's a hell of a long way to run on this. So yeah, please bear that in mind. But first of all, right, Eddie's press conference, what was said? Now, in a 35-minute media briefing at the club's training ground, there were over 30 questions on Sandro Tonali. So you do the maths. It absolutely dominated this morning's proceedings. Really, actually, not since Steve Bruce and Matt Ritchie have I seen one press conference be absolutely taken up by one subject. And listen, we've got a good relationship with Eddie. You know, I like him, we all like him, we respect him. There's never really been any tension there at all. And this morning there wasn't tension, there wasn't any animosity from us to him or vice versa, but there were certainly some terse moments, and this was an example of journalists having to ask questions and Eddie having to give answers that are difficult for him, and we had to ask, difficult probing questions. In all honesty, really, the questions we are asking probably aren't intended or meant for Eddie. If we had our way, it would be the guys higher up the food chain, if you like, within the club. Dan Ashworth, Darren Eales, the owners, whoever that may be. And Eddie even said so himself to one of my questions. I said to him, should Newcastle United be made to pay for this, as in an act, an indiscretion, an offence that was committed before Sandro Tonali was under contract at Newcastle? Why should the club, or is it fair that the club are the ones who are made to pay in terms of they're left with a very expensive asset, having to pay his wages? Eddie said, well, no, that is a question for Dan Ashworth to answer. And I think there were several questions which he would have liked, and he almost did give the same response, that he wasn't really well versed, or wasn't his position to address those issues, such as, will the club be taking legal action? That's something we'll get on to a little bit further down the line. But, I think this one, as I said a couple of minutes ago, has got a lot left to run on it in terms of the repercussions and the exact nature of who knew what and when. And one of the very early questions Eddie was asked today was, is there a suspicion or a concern that at the point of sale, Milan knew about the impending investigation? Eddie said, well, I can't comment on that. What he did say with regards to the legal action was, he's sure the club will be doing all they have to do. And that was a direct question as to whether they would be going down the legal route. I think, first of all, Newcastle will wait and see what the punishment is, gather all of the facts before they
before they then do address that. But I would say that's absolutely certain, and it should be as well, by the way, and we'll come on to why I think that. Eddie was also asked, was there and these were some of the difficult questions, was there a disappointment in the player? Should Sandro Tonali have confessed more or revealed more at the point of joining the club and signing a very lucrative contract? Eddie said this was almost his shortest answer. I'm not going to answer that question. Due diligence, he was pushed on. Was there a frustration? Was there anger that Newcastle didn't know about Sandro Tonali's gambling issues? Bearing in mind these go back 3 or 4 years to his time at Brescia. Should more have been done on the club's part? Eddie denied that there was any guilt or any fault on the part of the club. He said with hindsight, of course, but at the time they were happy to be buying what they thought was a wonderful footballer, what they still think is a wonderful footballer, and someone who, again, he said Sandro Tonali is a very good character about him. He has no doubt of him as a person. What was Eddie's overriding message? Well, he came in and we knew he would be like this, and I understand why he was like this, and in many ways I applaud him for it, because one thing, and that was his support and his backing of the player. Every answer came back to that. Now, why do I applaud him for it? There was something he said right at the very end of the press conference, and it struck a chord in that he said, I understand where you guys are coming from, and by that, I think he meant the cold, hard, fairly forceful line of questioning. He said he understood that, but he said he sees another side. He sees the person, he sees the emotion, he sees the distress. And I totally understand that, because when you know someone, and this goes to across any walk of life, when you see the human side of it, you are given a totally different perspective. And because of that, Eddie Howe said that he feels duty bound. He has a duty of care to his player and a want to quote, to wrap his arms around him and protect him. And I get why Eddie come out, and I think it was right for him to do that. Now, he said that Sandro Tonali will be available for selection tomorrow. I don't think he's going to start him. I don't think he can start him. I think he probably will be on the bench, but he will be. I suspect he will be introduced at some point. And Eddie said himself that he hopes and expects the home support to give him a good reception and show him the love that Eddie has shown him, the club has shown him, and he wants the supporters to do the same too. Is that right? I don't know. I'll leave that for you guys to decide where you stand on this. Now, I asked Eddie, what does this mean for Sandro Tonali's long-term future at the club? Don't forget, he's got 4.5 years left to run on his contract. Does Sandro, beyond this, whatever length of ban this may be, does he want to remain at the club? Are the club still committed to him? And Eddie said yes. That goes without saying. We want Sandro Tonali and he wants us. They've just got to find a way of working through, these are Eddie's words, working through and negotiating what is going to be a very difficult period for both parties. And part of the reason I asked that question was because we were in the San Siro 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there was some surprise among us guys in the press when Sandro Tonali sat down in front of us. He was asked a question about, I forget what it was about, but he gave a totally different answer, and his answer was all about his struggles during his early weeks at Newcastle, how he felt lost, how he'd found it difficult to adapt, and that in part was the motivation for my question to Eddie about Sandro's long-term future. He has had this difficult start off the pitch. On the pitch, it's been mixed. I think it's fair to say, some good, some not so good. So on the back of this and the ban whereby you would expect he goes back to Italy for certainly the immediate term. I know when Ivan Toney was banned down at Brentford, he wasn't able to train with his club. That was all football activities he was suspended from. That may well be the case with Sandro Tonali. So I think it throws up a legitimate question, long term beyond this. Does Tonali's future lie at Newcastle? We'll have to wait and see on that front, but certainly Eddie was pretty adamant today that it does. Now, what are my thoughts on the story? Well, one thing I will say before we go any further, and this is the key question that has come up from the very start. I've put it in copy this week and have raised it, and again, I am only raising the question, is what did Milan, and by extension the player, know at the point of sale in July? Now, the reason I say that is because this investigation includes what we're led to believe are historical bets going all the way back to 2019, 2020, when Sandro Tonali was a player at Brescia, which carried on through his time at Milan. That being the case, is there a chance that the investigation was already underway and that several people were aware of it in July? I would say so. Yes, you could say there is. Sorry guys, did you hear the door? Yeah, Milan's lawyers were quick, weren't they? that being the case, I'll leave this particular subject right here. But what I will say is I think it's an issue Newcastle have to explore and will explore. Will it be difficult to prove either way? Well, yes, absolutely. It's probably one Newcastle is going to have to swallow and take on the chin, really. But nonetheless, it's a valid question, and one I know us guys and you are also asking. As for the player, where does this leave Newcastle contractually, bearing in mind it is the actions of Sandro Tonali that have rendered him unable to fulfil his contract for what we're expecting to be the next 12 months? Would they have a case against him? Well, maybe, perhaps. We've seen it in the past, albeit with more extreme examples. Adrian Mutu down at Chelsea, this isn't a similar sort of offence, but those avenues are available. Now, will Newcastle pursue that? Probably not, almost certainly not, based on what Eddie Howe said today and that determination to stand by the player. So I don't think that one will go anywhere. But legally, retrospectively, I think there is a little bit to look at here. Now, due diligence, what are my thoughts on that? You can throw the accusation, and some supporters have, and certainly one of my colleagues today asked a question with regards to this: should Newcastle have done more? I think I'm going to defend him here to a degree, in that I think a gambling addiction is by its nature an addiction that is secret, so it probably would have been hard to unearth that. Nonetheless, would some people somewhere have known about, potentially, would there have been whispers or rumours about gambling issues with Tonali, given that they've been going on for so long, it looks like? Maybe. I'm going to tell you a little story here with regard to due diligence. Now, back in 2015, when Newcastle were on the verge of signing Alexander Mitrovic, I was out in Brussels, actually. I was on a different job there to see Ravel Morrison play for Lazio. Ravel Morrison got injured the day before in training, and I had nothing else to do. So I missed Morrison, what I was meant to be there to do. But I also had the idea, do a little bit of background on Mitrovic. So I used my time to go and speak to people in Anderlecht, journalists, one of the restaurants, bars where he ate in, drank with his family, the manager, went to a game at the club, did all of that, and in the end I came back and wrote a piece in the Daily Mail, and I remember the headline was Alexander Mitrovic is a 5-year-old trapped in a monster's body. And there was a member, very senior member of staff at Newcastle United, who threw the paper down on another very senior member of staff at Newcastle United on their desk and said, what the hell is Craig Hope up to? Now, a month later, on Alexander Mitrovic's full home debut for Newcastle, he got sent off after 16 minutes against Arsenal, and lo and behold, there was some merit and some legs in the background checks I had done. The point I make is, and I always say this slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I do think a lot of money does go into due diligence now, but football clubs really should invest money in investigative journalist types just to go and spend 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks even on the ground, if they're really set on a player, to go and speak to as many different people as possible to try to unearth these little things. Now, maybe they do, maybe we aren't giving them enough credit in terms of that. Maybe they've done as much as they possibly could do, but you see the point I'm making. It is so important to know about far more than just the football player. It is the person and their background you've really got to delve into for eventualities like this. Now, this is an extreme case, and because of that, I do have some sympathy with Newcastle. Now, one other little thing to wrap up on Tonali, yes, before we move on to other news, and there was some other news, there were 2 other questions asked that were non-Tonali related, and it's what will the FA do about this? Now, the FA are saying at the moment that Sandro Tonali is free to play. I think they're waiting on the outcome of the Italian investigation. Now, if Sandro does have a gambling addiction, like his agent has said, you would assume that the gambling didn't automatically stop on late July when he signed for Newcastle. So to that end, will the FA have something to look into? Were betting rules broken under their jurisdiction? We'll have to wait and see on that, but that is something we've got to keep on top of as journalists. Now, also as journalists, we have to ask questions about injuries today, and if you've got this far, well done. I know it was quite funny actually. After I'd put the news on Twitter, on X, about Sandro Tonali, what Eddie had said about him, I also put some injury news on there. The injury news got twice as many views. Ultimately, it comes back to football, and there's a very big game against Crystal Palace tomorrow. Big news, Alexander Isak looks as if he's out. He hasn't trained since the groin problem forced him out of Sweden's games over the break. It looks very unlikely he'll play. Sven Botman as well. I didn't expect him to be back for this one. Eddie said he's improved over the course of the break. I think it might be beyond. Joe Willock's still missing. Louis Miley has glandular fever, but the good news for Newcastle is Joe Linton is back. He will play tomorrow. So that end, I think the team, as good as picks itself, I'll rattle through it. I think it'll be Pope, Trippier, Lascelles, Shaw, Dan Burn, a midfield three of Joe Linton, Bruno, Sean Longstaff up front, Anthony Gordon back after suspension, Callum Wilson, who's been away training in Dubai, he now is on a full 2 weeks on the back of a slight hamstring problem, and Miguel Almiron. There you go, the guys who complain, and I always say Almiron, I've listened, Miguel Almiron on the right. That's what I think the team will be for tomorrow. It's, like I said, as good as picks itself really. He's got the selection call to make on Tonali. I'd be surprised if he started him. I don't think personally, if you ask me my opinion now, if I'm pushed forward, do I think it'd be the right decision to start him? I would say no. I think his head will probably be all over the place after the past week. So yeah, I'll be back. I'm at St James's Park tomorrow. Click on the links below. There's the feature about Eden Hazard, which was great fun. There's the news stories taking you through the Daily Mail's the stories we've written today about Sandro Tonali. Keep on watching, as well as the lawyers. You guys hit like and subscribe. I'll be back from St James's tomorrow. Promises to be another fascinating afternoon, and we might just have some football to talk about. Okay, take care guys, see you soon.